Hello, welcome to my presentation on poverty and early childhood. My name is Chelsea Parsons. So one of the first things I did when I started researching this topic was trying to find a guideline or kind of a definition of what exactly poverty is, so there's an understanding moving forward of what I'm talking about when I refer to poverty throughout this presentation. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services defines poverty by how many people are living in the household and how much income that family is making. So say there's a three-person household, maybe a single parent and then two children. If that family is making less than $21,720, they are considered to be living below poverty. And this continues on down to 8 people. It gives a income amount of how much money they need to be making or lack of money that they're making to be considered in poverty. And then if there's more than 8 people, they add on this kind of base amount at $4,480 for each additional person. So you would add that on to the amount for 8 people, for 9 people, and then continue on for how many more people. So when I refer to a family living in poverty, it's how many people are living in the house and how much income that household is making. So what exactly does poverty mean for children? Poverty impacts children in the moment and across time. I found this kind of quote to be super impactful from an article I read by Haney. I think that people think of the impacts of poverty right in the moment, but it also impacts them across time. And what that kind of means is if a child is living in poverty when they are in kindergarten, there can be lifelong effects as far as lower academic achievement, behavior or social problems, and then developmental difficulties. It also can predict how successful a student will be when they become an adult in regards to their health and their productivity. So if a child is living in poverty and that's kind of been a generational thing, it's harder for them to get out of that cycle of poverty and look for a better paying job, continue post-secondary education, different things like that. So family factors that impact student success, these can be things like job loss or income instability. If a parent is working a job that isn't stable, like maybe in the oil fields or a different type of job like that, it can cause problems where they're not able to help their child as much academically in regards to school. Residential moves, either within the same town or moving from town to town. Moving is, I think we all would agree that moving is a big pain in everyone's butt. And when you move to a new house, sometimes you don't have all the utilities set up, you don't have the internet set up yet. So those things can all be impactful for a student who needs to be doing homework at home and they're not able to do it. Maybe they're expected to pack every night when they go home, and this is kind of a cycle that continues where they move a lot. Time with parent. If a parent is working multiple jobs and going to school, their time with their child is going to be less, and sometimes that might mean less focus on academics. Educational level of parents. If a parent didn't graduate high school, they might not emphasize that for their child. And then family attitudes and expectations. One kind of statement that I want to make about people who live in poverty is that just because they don't make a lot of money doesn't mean that they don't want their child to be successful academically. I've seen this firsthand with some of my families where the parents are really encouraging of them going on to school because they never did and they want more for their child. Just because it seems like maybe they don't have enough time when they're working multiple jobs or they're not as involved with their student as, parents who have the ability to stay home with their child, doesn't mean that they care any less. It just means that there are some things because of the income restriction that they're not able to do. But it doesn't mean that they care any less about their child. So one really positive thing is that more states are receiving funding for preschool within the public school setting. The school that I work at currently, we have a preschool within our public school, And there are just a lot of benefits of having preschools in schools. When I researched this topic, I didn't realize how many benefits there are. There are support for families, awareness of resources. There are also abilities for schools to spend less money in regards to funding a child in special education, as regards to realizing when they're in preschool that they need counseling services and they don't need to be placed in special education. Achievement gaps across ethnic and income groups begin during early childhood years and persist as children get older. So those achievement gaps, when they're present when the child is young, if interventions aren't had or made, the child is going to continue to progress slowly and not be at the same level of their peers. And this is something that preschools can help with, where they can see, if they are truly struggling to learn academically, there can be interventions offered early on that will help them achieve at the same level of their peers. Special education identification. Unfortunately, a lot of students who live in poverty get placed in special education and they don't necessarily need to be. So gender, minority status, and socioeconomic status all impact the identification for special education. So what that looks like is a student who's living in poverty and maybe experienced trauma when they were younger. In preschool, maybe it's easily seen that they need to be seeing a counselor, need to do play therapy to kind of work through some of that trauma. Whereas if they didn't go to preschool and they are placed in the public school setting in kindergarten right away, and there's, more students per teacher, that it might just be seen that, they're emotionally disturbed and they need to be placed in special education. They can't be in the general education class. So there are really a lot of benefits of having preschools, and bridging that gap between when students go from preschool to kindergarten, helping parents transition, different things like that. There's so much that go into help that families can receive when preschools are part of the school. So the early years of school are critical to develop skills. If skills aren't developed, students are more likely to be identified in special education. And then one kind of statistic that I found really interesting is that boys are 2.29 times more likely than girls to be identified between kindergarten and fourth grade. And I know I personally see that as true in my classroom. I had all boy students on my caseload this year. I think the biggest thing that I found in the research that I did is that preschools fight poverty. I think that's such a impactful thing to say. They can help have students make better life choices. Maybe if a student starts receiving, the academic work and that level of teachers pushing them and having high expectations of them, they can lessen teen pregnancies. They can help students make better choices when they graduate with realizing they need post-secondary training. They help students realize that everyone can learn and that all students have the ability to develop a love for learning. It helps to have a successful start. There is a lower probability of failing a grade or placement in special education, like I talked about earlier. Preschools allow parents to work, and this is a really impactful thing that obviously can help fight poverty, where parents are receiving free childcare, as opposed to maybe an older student they had where preschool wasn't offered in the public school setting and they had to pay for childcare. And now they're getting it for free. That frees up time for them not only to work, but also for them to use that money, wisely towards things that they need. Preschools fight poverty, but it benefits students of all socioeconomic statuses. Regardless of how much income a family is making, preschool is beneficial for all students because it develops that love for learning, and it shows that everyone can learn from an earlier age. And having those teacher higher expectations can help set the tone for how the student perceives school from preschool to the time they graduate. Support the whole child is definitely something that I believe in as a teacher, and also respecting the family. Counseling and mental health services should be provided for students so they are not wrongfully identified in special education. And I don't want to say that counseling is something simple, but in regards to the school setting, it's something that can simply be offered when there are already counselors there. And this helps funding of schools, because beforehand, a student might be labeled as in special education because they think, oh, this child is emotionally disturbed, they can't be in the general education classroom, and so they place them in special education. But if they are in preschool and there's kind of more time to get to know the student and the family, realize there's a history of trauma and that the student simply needs counseling. It helps families to stay involved. Every child has the right to learn in the least restrictive environment. It is a restrictive environment to place students in special education, and sometimes there are things going on other than them achieving academically. Sometimes there are factors because of poverty, living from house to house, maybe being homeless, not always knowing where food is going to come from, not always having the proper clothes, things like that. Those are things that can be easily helped and identified in preschool, whereas when they get into the public school setting, it might be seen as a problem and, oh, this child needs to be placed in special education. Preschools can reduce crime rates, that they can increase high school graduation rates, that can decrease teen pregnancy, and increase income levels at the adult level. So preschools are really powerful in fighting poverty. So kind of to sum up, the most important things that I talked about is that early childhood education has the ability to reduce poverty and reduce over-identifying children with special needs. Like I said, placing a child in special education is a restrictive environment, and that's not necessarily always the answer to problems that are seen in schools like poverty. Poverty has lifelong impacts for students and families. So that student who's easily identified in preschool as needing counseling, that might need to continue on until they're even an adult. The earlier families can receive supports and services for their children, the better. That's another reason why preschools are so impactful. Allowing parents to work while that child is in preschool for free, that can allow parents to work and maybe get ahead when before they wouldn't have been able to. Some good news is that more and more states are adopting early childhood education and preschool programs after seeing all of these amazing benefits. And then I think this is the most important thing, is that just because a family is living in poverty does not mean that they don't care about their children academically. This is a really big generalization, and it is a misconceived stigma. A parent who lives in poverty does not care about their child because of how much money they're making. They definitely care about their child, and they want the same things that all parents want for their children, to be successful and things like that. Their time might just be limited with them, and they might need more supports or helps, which the school can provide. I think we've definitely seen that with COVID-19, how schools are so much more than places of academics. Schools are places that can help families and partner with families and also help children. And these 2 slides are my resources. Thank you for listening to my presentation.